Over the course of today and tomorrow, you're going to hear different speakers talking about the different levels of school-wide positive behavior support, which we call the 3-tier model. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Tier 1 strategies are school-wide positive behavior support to foster pro-social behaviors for all students in the school. And these are generally effective for the vast majority, 80–90%. Tier 2 kids are those individuals who need a bit more support. It's not necessarily one-on-one, maybe some small groups, some counseling, things like that. Those are our Tier 2 kids. And then the Tier 3 kids are the single-digit percentage kids who present the greatest challenges. They have the most severe problem behavior. They're where most of our resources go quite often because they can present with such disruptive behavior. So my message here is not to talk anymore about the 3 tiers, but just to understand that the message of function, this deterministic worldview, that I have to ask the question, WTF, what's the function? To figure out what's going on so that I can respond more intelligently, this applies to everybody, right? Not just those kids in the red at the top there. This applies to all of your students if you're a teacher, to your own kids if you're a parent, to your significant other if you're in a romantic relationship. Right? Think about your significant other's problem behavior as you judge it by function. Right? This is good stuff here. You can apply this beyond just your work. So we need to change our response to problem behavior, right? We need to start thinking about WTF. What's the function? What's the function? What's the function? What's the function? I like it so much, I'm going to launch my own brand of clothing. WTF on the front, what's the function on the back, right? If you like it, I'll start taking orders. So, excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. Let's take a little tangent into the past, how we've looked at things in the past, because actually it is how many people still see things today. So problem behavior in the past was considered these 3 things: inevitable, within the person, or maladaptive. So let's parse each of these out. Inevitable, that is if you have a label. So I know we're not here just to talk about autism, but if you have a student with autism who's engaging in problem behavior, it's like the label of autism somehow explains the behavior, the problem behavior. So if I have a student with autism and I'm out in the community, we're walking through Walmart, my student has a tantrum, melting down, people stop, they're congregating, they're looking, they're judging, it makes you uncomfortable, right? They're wondering what's going on. If I was to look at that child screaming on the floor and just say, autism, a lot of people go, ah, okay, and just continue with their shopping, as though the word autism somehow explained that problem. No, that doesn't explain anything. I know some kids with autism who are downright angelic. Right? They have 0 problem behavior. They're the best behaved child in their family. They're certainly the best behaved child in their classroom. Right? So autism does not equal problem behavior. Label does not equal problem behavior. It's kind of a lazy way of dealing with things. If that same kiddo was melting down in Walmart and I looked at everyone and said, ah, he's a Gemini, right? It's no better. It doesn't make sense, right? Or that it's within the person, that there's something just fundamentally wrong with this person. They were just born, the t-shirt, born to be bad. I was working with a student years ago, and he presented with a lot of serious problem behaviors in kindergarten and grade 1. He had 2 EAs. One of them had to wear running shoes at all times. They had walkie-talkies. They're chasing him. He had a lot of challenging behavior, and his grandma, his elderly grandma who lived in the home, had to support him quite a bit of the time, and she bore the brunt of a lot of it, and she was pretty stressed out and distressed by it. And one day I showed up at her house, and she answered the door, and I could see she wanted to communicate with me. She had very broken English, and she's, Richard, even if no autism, he's just bad. Yes? He's just bad, right? And I laughed, and then I realized, oh, she's totally serious. I shouldn't laugh, right? That's the way she's seeing it. Like there's just something wrong with him. That's not the case, is it? He's not just bad. Maladaptive is the other word we use. Maladaptive implies that it's non-functional, or it's meaningless, or it's bad for you. If all problem behavior is communicative, that it's serving some purpose for the individual, then it's anything but maladaptive, right? If it's happening on a regular basis, we tend not to do things on a regular basis that are maladaptive. But with maladaptive, people will say, well, it's happening randomly, arbitrarily, for no reason, right? That's not the case, right? We know that it's not maladaptive. Problem behavior is working for the individual in some way. That's why we have to ask the question, WTF, what's the function? So I would say that we need to omit this from our vocabulary. Don't call it maladaptive anymore. It's adaptive behavior. Problem behavior is often the single most adaptive behavior in an individual's repertoire. Dr. Kern-Cagle alluded to that when she said the child could sign a 3-sign sentence or just hit, right? Hitting is the most effective thing, right? So it's very adaptive for the individual. So what's the problem with where all of these focus the blame, all of these explanations for problem behavior point the finger at the individual themselves, right? It's just their label, it's just them, right? It's for no reason. And when we point our finger and we blame the individual, then we wipe our hands, we wash our hands of any responsibility. What can I possibly do as the parent or as the teacher if it's just them, right? I just have to deal with it. And that's problematic, because that leads to the traditional response to problem behavior. Cue the ominous music, dun, 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 behavior management techniques, right? So if you do something bad's gonna happen to you. That's the message we often see in our society. And this is what people will defer to in the, when they see problem behavior, that they don't understand it. So scolding and reprimands. In the earlier video this morning, you saw the grandma shouting at her child, right? That's a reprimand. That happens all the time. Teachers reprimand, parents reprimand, right? We don't think of it as a particular punishment procedure, but it's a punishment procedure. The intent of it is. There's timeouts, they're sending you to the office, not so much these days, but when I was a high school student, Mr. Redikoff, my vice principal, had the strap hanging in his office, right? It was still there. We still use detentions and expulsion, and these are all responses to problem behavior. So the problem with these traditional interventions is that they are just reactive. And reactive ain't good, folks. It focuses and it puts all the resources and time and energy on what happens after problem behavior. And that's not a very pragmatic or effective way of dealing with it. Right? Most of our intervention is after the fact. You're just putting out fires. And it's no fun being a firefighter. It's stressful to be a firefighter because you're always anticipating the next fire. And what are you going to do when that fire occurs, right? This is a problem because it requires punishment. And we know in terms of research that there's a ton of problems with punishment. And by punishment, I'm not referring to corporal punishment. I'm not talking about spanking a child, right? Just any of those generic punishment procedures that you saw on the previous slide. So why do people still use punishment? Because everybody does. Because it's easy. Business as usual, baby. I can just run my classroom, run my home the way I want to, and when problem behavior happens, I can just suppress it with some type of consequence and it goes away and I can carry on with my life, right? So it's easy. It's kind of a lazy way to deal with things because I don't have to be preventative or proactive if I just punish it. And when we use punishment effectively, like if you can shout at a child and they stop doing something, that's really effective for the person who's shouting, right? It's very effective for the punishing agent, the punisher. So it's reinforcing to us if I can just respond reactively to a problem, suppress it and it goes away, whatever I did, that worked for me, right? And that's the appeal of it. And it's ubiquitous, it's normative. Reprimands, timeouts, loss of privilege, response cost or fines, restitution. These things are integrated into our society. They're integrated into our legal system. They're very, very common, right? But they're inherently reactive. And it's always the first question when a parent or a school staff comes up to me and says, how do we deal with the problem behavior? It's what do I do when there's the problem? It's totally focused on response to the problem, right? Not prevention.